Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Just a few announcements. Don't forget, we're not going to be here next week. We're going to be in Georgetown. We're having the presentation by Mr. Joel Richardson on Islamic Antichrist and Islam in the end times. And it's going to be very, very informative. What we're hoping to do is broadcast the webcam at that time for everybody out. I talked to Mr. Richardson about that, and he doesn't have any objections to us taping it or broadcasting it, so I'll make a series of tapes as well for those that would like it, and then for those of you out there in webcam world, you know who you are, and you'll be able to view it too as well. All right. I can't think of any other announcements, but today's sermon today is wow, something weird. Anyway, today's sermon today stems from yes, Pam.
What time is it starting?
Oh, I'm sorry, 9:30. It's 100 Stadium Road. It's the Georgetown Event Center. It's, if you know where Georgetown Park is, it's on the north side of Georgetown. And it's kind of on the main street going into Georgetown. You kind of get off. I've got a map on the website. You can go to, if you go to the blog site, it'll show you where the events are and everything. On the front page of the website, when you bring it up, it says blog. Click on that, and there's maps on how to get to all the events that we have coming up. And so, back where I was before the music and all the other things. Last week, Ray was giving a sermon, and very good sermon too, by the way. And we were in Isaiah. I think he was in chapter 4 or 5. I can't remember exactly where he was, but I was kind of reading over on the side some of the other scriptures, and I was kind of pointed to Virginia because I saw one about the ornaments sitting there, and actually, if you want to turn there to Luke chapter 3, verse 18, and I was just kind of messing around looking at that, and I'm kind of jumping ahead on my sermon. My sermons never come out the way I write them down, so it doesn't matter as long as we get the information to you. And in verse 18 of chapter 3, it says, "In that day the Lord will take away the finery, the jingling ankles, the scarves and the crescents, the pendants and bracelets and veils and headdresses of the leg, ornaments and headbands, of perfume boxes, charms and rings, nose jewels and festival apparel, and the mantles and outer garments and purses and mirrors and fine linen and turbans and robes." And I was kind of needling Virginia. I said, because she makes jewelry and stuff, and I said, see, you won't be able to do that in the future. God's going to take it away from you. Well, she pointed out to me, she says, well, look in verse 18. She says, it says the crescents. And I thought about it for a second, and we've got this Joel Richardson thing coming up, and it's really been on my mind a whole lot lately about Islam and its impact on us toward the end times and stuff. And I thought, crescents, and I looked at it. Well, Isaiah is at least 1,000 years prior to the initiation of Islam. Islam's main symbol is the crescent moon. Now I thought, and things started rolling in my head, and I said, well, why would God want to take away symbols of the crescent moon, away from the people at that time and their turbans and things of that nature? I said, and it got things rolling in my mind, and I've been researching it all week, that particular scripture. And we're told in Luke 21, if you want to turn there, and this is the same scriptures that Nick was reading in his short sermon, except this is in Luke instead of Mark. But in verse 8, he says, in Luke 21, verse 8, he says, if I can find it. Well, we'll start in 20. He says, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that the desolation is near, and then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst... Am I in the right spot? I guess I am. No, I'm not. 21:8. I'm sorry. I'll get there. And he said, take heed that you be not deceived, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time draws near. Therefore do not go after them, but when you hear wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass, but the end will not come immediately. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes in various places, famines and pestilence. And this part of it was not actually in Matthew 24, but it is here in Luke. And he says, and there will be fearful signs and great signs from heaven. And we're looking at this, and I've been thinking about a lot of these things, and obviously we have the moon, and then we have the sun, and those obviously are in the heavens. We have three heavens. I don't want to have to go through all that, but we have three heavens that are spoken about in the Bible. We have the atmosphere, we have the outer space, then we have the heaven, which is Father's throne. And when we go and we look at these things, and one other thing I just want to throw in here. You know, during the Feast of Tabernacles this year, that there's going to be a comet. It's called Comet Elena or something like that. I believe is the name of it. Is going to pass between the earth and the sun. And they said there'll be at one point during the Feast of Tabernacles, you'll look up and this comet will be the size of the moon. Passing through. This is going to be a really astronomical event that's going to take place, and it's going to be something else, and it's really going to strike a lot of fear in people's heart. It's really going to wake a lot of people up, and then when you got this coming up in December 21st, 2012, and then we got blood moons coming up in 2014 on two different holy days. I mean, there's a lot of signs in heavens that kind of start shaking you up a little bit. But then when you get back to the moons and the stars and things like that we're not supposed to be worshiping or fearful of, and things, and it really gets you to thinking after a while, what's going on? Well, we in the church, in this church, and what we like to call God's church, and I know all the other religions out there also claim that they're God's church. I get that. But we have exclusively almost looked at the Catholic Church as the beast of end times, as the beast of revelations of end times. And I've had several conversations with people in the church about this particular thing. But here's the problem that I've had with this theory. At end times, at the time when the abomination of desolation happens, thank you, there will be, as there is now, three major religions in Jerusalem where this will take place. There is Islam, which we tend to exclude. There's Christianity, and there is Judaism. Now, when Antiochus Epiphanes enacted the first abomination of desolation in 167 BC, he was a Seleucid king, and he came, his dominion, his kingdom, was in Damascus, in Syria. He came, set up and he came to Jerusalem, and his whole point was to drive the religion of Judaism, or God's religion. I don't know what Judaism at that time, but it was God's teachings out of that region. Because what was happening, there was a civil war going on between the people, the Hellenistic people who believed in the Greek philosopher and the Greek teachings and the Greek gods, and those that followed God. And he wanted to get rid of them because he wanted the people, because he was within the Hellenistic teachings himself. They believed in all the Greek gods and things of that nature at that time. Islam wasn't there at that time. Christianity wasn't there at that time. You had the Hellenistic teachings and you had the teachings from God at that time. So these two factions were at war with each other. And so Antiochus Epiphanes decided to come in there and side with the Hellenistic Jews in trying to drive these people out. Well, he instigated a law against keeping the Sabbath. You could not teach your children to observe the Sabbath. You could not observe the Sabbath. You could not circumcise your children. If you circumcised your children, you would be killed. Your children would be killed. And so, in the process, once he took over and he sent his armies in there and took over and stuff, he set up a statue of Zeus inside the Holy of Holies. And he slaughtered a pig on the altar of God to defile and desecrate the altar so that they would not use it again. And they wouldn't until the Maccabees took back over and they built a new altar. And the altar had to be built in a specific way. Well, when we look at these three factions and we keep that in mind about what the first abomination of desolation was, and there was also another desolation that occurred in about 135 A.D., and Herodian went in there and built a temple to Jupiter over the existing temple. That temple stood before the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built in 691 A.D., and Herodian built that temple in 135 A.D., and it stood to 325 A.D. when Constantine came in there and leveled that temple. But it was a temple to Jupiter, and it stood directly over the top, or some believed over the top, of the original temple. And they also believe that, and I saw this on the Naked Archaeologist. I don't know if any of you ever watch him. He's not actually naked. He's an archaeologist, goes out there and he claims that. But he went out there and they showed this, and they believe that they have the Al-Aqsa Mosque is not actually built over the top of where the original temple stood. They built it, they got the temple of Jupiter wrong because the dimensions weren't the same, and they saw a section of it and they built it over it, so it's not actually sitting over the temple, or the Al-Aqsa Mosque is not actually sitting over where the actual temple was. It's sitting over a portion of where the Jupiter temple was. But anyway, we know Christianity was co-opted by paganism. We know that the teachings that we see today in Christianity have a full array of pagan teachings and pagan background. Christmas is entirely pagan. Now, I know a lot of people don't want to believe that, but it is. All you have to do is a little bit of study and go to the library. It's easy to find. And Easter, if you go and you look back at it, it goes all the way back to ancient Babylon. It's a diabolical teaching as far as children sacrifice and infanticide. And we know that the symbols of Christianity are the sun, the Trinity, the cross. And we can see a lot of these things. You can read a lot of these things. One of the best books on this subject is The Two Babylons by Hyssop. And we know this, and we have many books and teachings that show us this. Israel, we have the history of Judaism. It's in this book. It's laid out for us. And we can see the teachings in this book and how we're supposed to observe the teachings. It came down to us. It's a written record, and we have that for us to see here today, and we can see its progression through time, how it came to us. So we know the backgrounds, and we're very familiar in this church with the backgrounds of Judaism, if you want to call it that, and Christianity. We have the backgrounds of those. Well, what about Islam? Did Islam begin with Muhammad in 570 A.D. at his birth, or did begin earlier than that? Was there something before that, just like it was with Christianity? And I got to thinking about that because of the scripture that we just read in Isaiah chapter 3, verse 18. And a lot of things started popping up as I was studying and I was digging this stuff out. Now, when we read this, we find that there is a lot of symbols in Islam. Or are these purely Islamic symbols, like the Crescent Moon? We read that, yet here we find in Isaiah symbols of Islam, the turban, the crescent, and other symbols. And also, if you'll turn to Judges chapter 8, 18, we'll find the crescent in a couple other places as well. Judges chapter 8, 18, and you may remember this passage. It's where Gideon has gone to war with the Mennonites, and I'm just going to read some portions of it because I don't want to get into the whole thing time-wise as one of the considerations. But I'll start in verse 18 here in Judges 8, and he says, "And he said to Zaban and Zalmunna, what kind of men are they whom you killed at Tabor? And they answered, as you so were, they each one resembled the son of a king. And then he said, they were my brothers and the sons of my mother. And the Lord lives, if you let them live, I would not kill you. And he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise and kill them. But the youth would not draw a sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. So Zaban and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and kill us, for a man is his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on their camels' necks. Took the crescent ornament. Now I went back and I looked at all these instances that I'm reading you in the Tanakh, which is the Jewish translation of the Old Testament. And it says crescents in here, in the Tanakh. So, and there's some Bible that says crescents, and there's some Bible that says other things. I'm not sure what they are. But I know that different translations have different words for it. But I know the Tanakh, when I really want to see what a good translation is, I go to that and I look. Because it's the Jewish translation into it. And it says crescents. Well, he goes on, and he kills these two guys, and he takes the crescents, and he goes down, drop down to verse 25. He says, so they answered, says, we will gladly give them. And they spread out a garment, and each man threw into it earrings from his plunder. Now the weight of 1,700 shekels of gold, beside the crescent ornaments, pendants, and purple roses, which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were round their necks and camels' necks. So he mentions it again within the same chapter about these crescents. And you think, okay, well this goes back prior to Isaiah. Probably this is during David's time. It would have been about 300 or 400 years prior to that. So you get to thinking, well, what was going on with these crescents that these people were worshiping? Well, here we have Midianites. They come from the area of Medina or Medina. Now, you may not be familiar with that area, so let me give you some history now. The worship, now we're going to get into moon worship. The worship of the moon was primarily and pretty much covered the whole entire region of the Arabian Peninsula. Midian is in the northwest part of that region and was in the area of moon worship. And the three most holy sites of Islam is Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. Mecca is holy because that's where Muhammad was born and died, so to speak. He was born in 570 A.D. and he died in 632 A.D. But he did not live in Mecca that whole entire time. Most of the time that he lived and his inspiration came to him was in Medina. He was not born into a Christian family. He was born into a moon-worshiping family. They worshiped the goddess, or the god of sin, S-I-N, which is the god of moon that they worshiped during that time. And in Mecca, it became the major trade route in an ancient world. Now, a little bit of Islam belief about Mecca. It's their belief. Has everybody seen? Everybody knows what Mecca is. All the Islam people today bow down 5 times a day toward Mecca, wherever they are in the world. They bow down to it and they worship Allah toward Mecca 5 times a day. And Mecca is on the western coast of Saudi Arabia. Now, I didn't write the name of the area down. I was going to, and I forgot. Yes, I do have it here, I think. The area is called Paran, and in modern language, it's called, there is a mountain there called Jebel El Laz. Does anybody know what that means, Jebel El Laz? That is the mountain of God. Mount Sinai is right in that very area. What we call Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb, is a better interpretation. Now, if you've seen the pictures, which a lot of you may have, because this time of year they're worshiping Ramadan this time of year. If you've seen the pictures, you'll see all these people in this big stadium in Mecca, and they're going around this little hut in the middle of this place. It's called a Kaaba. Well, this Kaaba is believed by Islam to be the tomb of Hagar. Hagar, if you don't know who she was the mother of Ishmael, which was actually Abraham's firstborn before Isaac. And there's this black rock in there that they worship that they believe came from the moon. And they worship this. Now, one of the things that they believed is when Abraham left the area and Hagar and Ishmael had been driven out, and this is the area that they were in. And whenever they left, Hagar went around looking for water. She couldn't find water to give Ishmael. So this angel appeared. Now, this is Islam belief, okay? And this angel appeared in that area, the angel Gabriel, and he struck the ground with one of his wings and water appeared. And that's what created the spring, is to make it a place where people could survive, where the land in that area flourished and became a major trade route. We know that during the Exodus that Moses led the people of Israel through there and went to the mountain of Sinai. He received the law there. He struck the rock there. And you can go there today and you can see this rock. Ron Wyatt went in that area years ago, and he went up there and he went through it, and he showed the cows on the depictions on the rock of the cows and things of that nature in the area, and the worship of them. But there's a rock there, and that rock spewed forth water at that time after Moses striking it. And Moses got in trouble over it. But they were worshiping cows there. They brought that religion from Egypt. But that religion went beyond Egypt. They brought it with them, and it came into that area, I believe, through Moses. Just my belief here, so I can't really say. But anyway, you get a little bit of truth from the Bible, and you get what the Islam people have put as their mythology on top of that. But there's some things that you can't deny in this. And the similarities is that they worshipped something there in that valley. Now, they had 360 religions in Mecca at one time. But their main overriding religion or belief was the worship of the moon god, Sin. And let me read this to you. Islam's origins have been traced back to scholars to the ancient fertility religion of the worship of the moon god, which is always a dominant religion of Arabia. The moon god was worshipped by praying toward Mecca several times a day, making an annual pilgrimage to the Kaaba, which was a temple of the moon god, running around the Kaaba 7 times, caressing an idol of black stone set in a wall of Kaaba, running between 2 hills, making an animal sacrifices, and gathering on Fridays for prayer, giving alms to the poor, etc. These were pagan rites practiced by the Arabs long before Muhammad was born. They co-opted Muhammad and his family. He was born into the worship of the moon god, and he co-opted the religion of the moon god. Now, I told you that the moon god's name was Sin, and the scholars believe that that's where the term of the mountain of God came from, Mount Sinai, because it's right there. The correct name of that mountain, the mountain of God, the mountain of Yahweh, is Mount Horeb. It's not Mount Sinai. We call it Mount Sinai. That is the mountain of the moon god, is what they call it. They can give you a little food for thought there. Now, I'm going to give you another name for the moon god that they called there at that time. Allah. The moon god's name was Allah. They're still praying to Allah today. The moon god was prominent during in that whole region, in that whole area. There is another instance, or another place, where the moon god originated, the moon worship originated from, came from, was Ur. The city of Ur. Does anybody remember anything about the city of Ur? Turn to Genesis chapter 11, verse 27. And another place that they had a prominent temple that they worshiped the moon god at, the Crescent Moon, was in Haran. Those are 2 cities that we have some information about. In 11:27 of Genesis says, "This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot, and Haran died before his father Terah in his native land in Ur of Chaldees. Then Abraham and Nahor took wives, and the name of Abraham's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, and the daughter of Haran, the daughter of Milcah, and the father of Ishka. But Sarai was barren, and she had no child. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, and the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, and his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur to the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran." And then in verse 1 of chapter 12, he says, "Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of the country from your family and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you." Abraham was 75 years old when this happened, when he left. He spent 75 years in two areas where the prominent god of those areas was the moon god, sin. Now, Abraham became faithful, followed God. So did Sarah. How many of the people that came with him? He brought a whole entourage with him. How many of them actually converted? Who knows? But he was not unfamiliar with who this pagan god was. This pagan god in Ur and Haran, in that area at that time, it was worshipped by the Sumerians. Sin was depicted by a winged bull, a fierce young bull, the way they put it. And the crescent moon became its symbol because it looks like the horns of a bull flying through the air. And so they worship cows. They worship bulls. What happened at the bottom of Mount Sinai whenever Moses didn't come down in time? What did they build? What can you go over there today in that same area and see depicted on the rocks that the Israelite children had put there? Bulls, the horns of bulls, and cows. That's what they worshiped. That was the representation. That's when you see that crescent moon up there, that is the depiction. It's not the moon. The moon looks like the horns, so they put the crescent moon up there. Well, back to Mecca. Where Mecca is on the map, I already said. It's the same area, Mount Sinai, Mount Hor. It's that same area. But modern scholars, let's see, that's not where I want. Did I read this? Let's see. The moon god of Ur, the first son of Enlil, the Sumerian god of earth and air, he is the Lord of the calendar. The Lord of the calendar. His cult exhibited monotheistic tendencies, which means that they worshiped one God, and that was the one. And since it was sin who determines the destinies of distant days, and whose plan no God knows. It's a very interesting thing when you read these things, that crescent was a symbol for 2,000 years before Christ was on this earth, and before probably 3,000 years almost before Muhammad and them began the Islam religion. Now, he was visited, according to what the scholars read and what they wrote about Muhammad, he was visited by an angel and given the religion by an angel. And that angel's name was, I think it was, I didn't write that down, but I believe it was Gabriel, whom he claimed came and gave him that. No, it was a different name. It sounded like Gabriel, but it wasn't it. It was similar to it, but he was given the Islam religion by this angel. And he actually went mad, the way the stories tell. And they slaughtered people in the name of this religion from one end of the continent to the other. We were listening to a movie or watching a movie or History Channel the other day about the grandson of Genghis Khan. And he became a Muslim. And he slaughtered 16 million people in the name of Islam. 16 million. There was one city, they said, over in the country of Georgia, or in that area over there, and it had 500,000 people in the city. And they killed every one of them, man, woman, and child in that city, in the name of Islam. It's a very, very violent religion. Well, the moon god is a violent religion. They practiced in the city of Carthage, which was a arch enemy of Rome. They had their own version of the sun god. His name was Tanit. And it was a moon god. And they found a cemetery of nothing but children that had been sacrificed to this god, the moon god. Rome had its own version too. It's called Juno. I don't think they were quite that bad. But the crescent moon became their symbol. And the symbol of the crescent moon did not appear upon their flag, upon their nation, until the 1400s. And before then, the princes of each tribe had their own flag that they flew under. But there was a time, around the time of Columbus coming to America, they incorporated the sign of the crescent moon. And they asked people today, said, well, the Islam today said, well, why did you co-opt that sign? And they said, well, the Christians have a sign. We had to have a sign. We had to have a banner to fly under. Now, keep in mind, if you ask Muslims about this, about it being the moon god and stuff prior to Muhammad, they'll deny it. Because it's a worship of moon. It's a worship of planet. But if you ask any Christian out there, if they worship the sun, what will they tell you? Oh, no, we don't worship the sun. There's no way we worship the sun. Yet their symbols are all over every church. You look at most of the entrances in a church, and there's a big round glass disc above the entrance of nearly every church, Christian church, and that is a sun symbol. And yet they will tell you they worship on the day of the sun, yet they tell you that's not. The Muslims worship on Friday, which is the same day that they worshipped on the moon god. And the original Trinity that people believed in the time of Samaria was the sun, the moon, and Venus. It wasn't gods. It was gods, but it wasn't gods. It was planets. There was a mosque in, I forgot where the city was, and they will even admit this, that had the symbol of the crescent moon 400 years prior to Muhammad's birth. They will admit that one, but they'll tell you that they don't worship the moon. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 15. He says, take careful heed to yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Lest you act corruptly and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, or likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, like a flying bull, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of fish that are in the water beneath the earth, like Dagon. Take heed, lest you lift your eyes to heaven when you see the sun, the moon, and the stars. You know Venus is one of the brightest stars in the heavens at night. All hosts of heaven you feel driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord your God has given to all the peoples under the whole heaven as a heritage. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be His people, an inheritance, as you are this day. He says, I brought you out from that garbage. We're not to be part of the sun worship. Christianity, we're not to be part of the moon worship. Islam. But we are to follow God's will and God's law. Judaism doesn't even do that in today's form. They have the books, they read from it, just like they did in the time of Christ, but they're corrupt in so many ways. They don't follow God's truth. And the three religions are there today in that capital of, you can say, well, it's capital of Israel, but it's that main city where God so many times have made reference to. And we look to see future events happening there in the valley of Medea, which we call Armageddon, out below Mount Carmel. We expect a great battle to happen there in that region. Folks, this is all Islamic country. Except for a little strip of land through there, which happens to be Israel at this particular time of day, but it's been held by Islam for the last 1,400 years, for the most part. There was 100 years there when Sir Godfrey took it when one of the Crusades and held it. They had a peace for 100 years, but that was about it. And it's been Islam. It is Islam. That whole area over there where Bible history is Islam. And it's blowing up today. How can Islam not play a part in end time? I don't know. You tell me. And if Iran and some of these other places like Egypt and the Palestinians have their way, they're going to drive the Israelis off into the sea, and then we're going to have a real mess. But that's what the battle's going to be about anyway. But we see the symbols. We see the symbols of the sun. We see the symbols of the moon. In Deuteronomy 17:1, he says this. He says, you shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God a bull, a sheep which has a blemish or a defect, for that is an abomination to the Lord your God. If there is found among you within any of your gates which the Lord your God gives you, a man or a woman who has been wicked in the sight of the Lord your God, in transgressing His covenants, who has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, either the sun, the moon, or any host of the heavens, which I have commanded, and it is told you, and you bear it, told to you, and you hear it, then you shall inquire diligently, and if it indeed is true and certain that such an abomination has been committed in Israel, then you shall bring out to your gates that man or woman who has committed that wicked thing, and shall stone to death that man or woman with stones. Now, I know a lot of people out in the world says, well, boy, that's a hard God that does that kind of thing. That's a hard God that would just, it would kill people for not worshiping Him or doing something wrong or whatever. I mean, to put the death penalty on these people. You hear this kind of thing. What did these people wind up doing? In Israel itself, they worshipped Ashtaroth. They worshipped Baal. They worshipped Moloch in the valley of Gehenna. And what did they do for them gods? Oh, well, they sent them their firstborn. What did the people who worship the god of sin, the god of moon, do? Well, they sent them their firstborn. Because this was not dealt with in the way that God had told the people of Israel to deal with it. Future generations died. Because it's just like this country today. Because we don't adhere to God's words and practices and what He tells us to do today, generation after generation is dying in this country in the form of abortion. In Jeremiah 10, verse 1, everybody knows this one. You can probably tell it to me by heart. Jeremiah 10, verse 1, he says, "Hear the word of the Lord that speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, don't learn the way of the Gentiles." In some of your scriptures it says heathens. He says, "Do not be dismayed at the signs of heaven." The Gentiles are dismayed at them. You know better. You know that there's a God out there. The people of Israel knew that there was a God out there, yet they went down and they built a golden calf anyway, after He had spoken to them. And they said, "Moses, you go up there and talk to him, because we're afraid of him." He says, don't learn the way of the sun god. Don't learn the way of the moon god. Don't learn the way of these gods. The original triads. The original Trinity. Don't learn those ways. They were all over those countries out there. They didn't have Christianity at the time of Abraham. They didn't have Judaism at the time of Abraham. Israel was not a name at the time of Abraham. They were his generations, his grandchildren and his children, who took those names, who had those names, and brought them down through history. What they had was Sumerian gods, Babylonian gods. And that's what we have today. We just don't recognize it, the form that they're in. Islam is not an original religion. It is co-opted by the moon god, just as Christianity has been co-opted by sun worship, or vice versa. Sun worship was co-opted by Christianity, and moon worship was co-opted by Islam. We are told in Revelations 18:1, he says, "After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having a great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried with mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." Have all the nations drunk of the wine of these false religions that came from Babylon? Oh boy, have they ever. They don't see it. God has blinded them. God has deafened them. They can't see it. But it's there nonetheless. And it says, "For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice of the heavens saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive her plagues. For her sins have reached the heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay to her double according to her works in the cup which she has mixed for double with her. For her. And in the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow, for it says in the heart, I sit as queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow." Is the Catholic Church part of the abomination and desolation? Going to be part of it? I don't have any problem with that. I don't have any problem with that at all. But I believe in my heart of hearts, and I'm not going to exclude Islam, they will be right there. And they will be cheering on the abomination of desolation. And they will be a part of it. There are 3 religions there. 3 main. Let's not exclude anything from anyone. We do it at our peril if we turn a blind eye. We really do. Because we have to come out of these religions. We have to come out of these beliefs. We have to bring people out of these beliefs as best we can. Because we serve no God other than the true God, other than Yahweh, other than Jesus Christ. We certainly do not serve Satan. And why is this important? Why is this important? Why should we learn about Islam? Why did I feel compelled to call this guy and have him set up this meeting next week? Because like I said, if we turn a blind eye to anything in this world that teaches us about history, about how we got to where we are today, we do that at our peril. When I saw this in Isaiah chapter 3, verse 18 last week, it just opened another door, another thought, another way of looking at things. Well, next week we're going to hear a lot of story. We're going to hear a lot of truth. We're going to hear a lot of different things about Islam. What are we to do with that? Just stuff it away in a shelf and say, well, that's interesting. And I'm not saying we need to believe this guy 100%. I certainly won't. I'll pick apart everything that he gives me. But I won't discard anything offhand either. Here a little, there a little, precept upon precept. That's how we're supposed to study Scripture and everything else that is handed to us.